Well, welcome to this week's R3 study. This week we had a lot of fun talking about some of our staff and their doppelgangers, those people out there that look just like them. And it might have left you wondering, who do I look like? It's really a weird idea to consider that there's somebody out there who might look just like you. And that's actually what Paul's calling us to here in Ephesians, to look like Jesus Christ. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1, it says this: "Imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children." You see, the goal for believers is to look like Christ. In what we do, in what we say, and how we act, we're to resemble Jesus Christ. We're to be Jesus' doppelgangers, if you will, reflecting in ourselves the very image of God. This goes back to our very creation. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, when God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us." You see, we're made to reflect Christ. We were made by his hands. He breathed his breath into us. We're made to imitate him in all we do. The problem is when sin happened, that image got broken in us. And yet still, by and large, we're called to live as much as we can like him, to look as much as we can like him, to imitate him in as many ways as possible. And you might say, well, what does that look like? Well, first and foremost, it looks like reflecting Christ in the way that you love. Christ is the greatest example of love. The sacrificial way Jesus expressed love not only made salvation possible, it also serves as an example for us of how we're supposed to love others. As we look back at Ephesians 5, let's look at verses 1 and 2. He says, "Imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God." So, why is it so hard for us to love? Well, it's because that part of us is damaged. That part of our souls is broken by sin. It's deformed to the point where we actually think that this whole love thing is just about us. Now compare that to Christ. Paul says, look at Christ's life, who didn't keep his life, who didn't hold on to his life, but poured his life out as a fragrant offering. And so we're left with a question: what does my life actually smell like to God? Is my life a fragrant offering poured out for him? Or does my life literally just stink? Second, we're called to reflect Christ in the way we live. Now, if you read this passage as a list of do's and don'ts, what you're doing is you're hugely misunderstanding this passage, because Christ isn't just calling us to act like him, to do a bunch of actions that look like him. He's actually calling us to reflect him. And there's a world of difference. You might say, well, what does that difference look like? Well, let's look at Ephesians chapter 5, verses 3 through 7. "Let there be no sexual immorality, impurity, or greed among you. Such sins have no place among God's people. Obscene stories, foolish talk, and coarse jokes, these are not for you. Instead, let there be thankfulness to God. You can be sure that no immoral, impure, or greedy person will inherit the kingdom of Christ and of God. For a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. Don't be fooled by those who try to excuse these sins, for the anger of God will fall on all who disobey him. Don't participate in the things these people do." In other words, Paul is saying, don't be a caricature Christian. This call is a call to live with authenticity, to be all that God made you to be, to fully embrace God's image in you, and to do your best to not live as a distorted image of who God made you to be. Third, we're called to reflect Christ in the way we shine. You've heard the saying, they're as different as day and night. Well, that's the contrast that Paul makes here. He's comparing the old life without Christ as compared to our new life in Christ. And he says Christ makes a night and day difference in our lives. Jesus is the light of the world. So when he comes in and he lives in you, we become children of that light. Look at verses 8 through 14. "For once you were full of darkness, but now you have light from the Lord. So live as people of light. For this light within you produces only what is good and right and true. Carefully determine what pleases the Lord. Take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, expose them. It is shameful even to talk about the things that ungodly people do in secret. But their evil intentions will be exposed when the light shines on them, for the light makes everything visible. This is why it said, 'Awake, O sleeper, rise up from the dead, and Christ will give you light.'" So remember, the goal of believers is to look like Christ. We are to be in his image. We are to be imitators of him. We are to be Jesus' doppelgangers, reflecting Christ to the world so that when the world looks at us, what they actually see is Jesus. Where do you struggle most with this? Where do you struggle most to reflect Christ? Discuss this, and then we'll jump back in with Reflect.
Now, I'm going to say something that may shock some of you right off the bat here, especially if you don't know me that well, but I'm a bit of a nerd. And by a bit of a nerd, I mean a pretty big one. I enjoy math and science. I study astronomy and astrophysics in my spare time. I've even been known to give a lecture or two on stargazing from time to time. All of that to say that there's something that's been on my radar recently, and it's the James Webb Space Telescope. Now, the James Webb Space Telescope is the replacement to the Hubble Space Telescope. Most of you probably are familiar with that. The Hubble is responsible for virtually every astro image that we have of galaxies outside of our own. It was a huge event in science pioneering, and it's been maintained for quite a few years now, but the James Webb is scheduled to replace it in October of 2018. James Webb has a vast array of 18 mirrors, and it's the size of a tennis court. By comparison, the Hubble is only about the size of a semi-truck. The James Webb is going to have 7 times the capability to capture images and light that the Hubble didn't. The mirrors have to be so precise on the James Webb Space Telescope that they're made of a material called beryllium. And this is a really hard, super dense material that they're polishing and polishing and polishing. The exact specifications require it to be shipped across the country 18 different times to 11 different locations to be polished and formatted and for everything to take off. As a matter of fact, they have to polish and grind and get the mirrors to be within 1/1,000,000th of an inch in accuracy. That's less than the width of a human hair. Why go through all this trouble? Well, because the tiniest blemish, the tiniest scratch in this mirror system will distort an image. It will ruin the entire observation. It will ruin an $8.7 billion project because, for lack of a better word, a space telescope is really just a big old fancy mirror. Now, you may be asking at this point, what does this have anything to do with Jesus or what we talked about on Sunday? And the truth is not much, but I'm still glad that you asked, because we talked about how it's our job as Christians, we talked about on Sunday, is to reflect Christ, to make him known, how we're supposed to reflect him in the way that we live, the way that we love, and the way that we shine, that we act like mirrors. And so as I was thinking about the James Webb Space Telescope and all the work that goes into those mirrors, I thought about ourselves as we reflect Christ, that we operate kind of like mirrors. And so that got me thinking, what does it take to make a good reflection? And I thought that we could apply some of the principles from this mirror to our own souls. So what does it take to make a good reflection? The first one is this: you have to reflect the right image. Pretty basic, I know, but the point is simply this, that for a mirror to work right, it has to be pointed in the right direction. This is like if you had your bathroom mirror and it was tilted down and looking at the floor. It wouldn't help you get ready in the morning. You wouldn't be able to see if your hair was funky or if you had something in your teeth. You might be able to know if you had good shoes on, but other than that, if a mirror's pointed at the wrong thing, then it won't make a good reflection. And so for us, as we talk about how our hearts reflect Jesus, then we have to make sure that we're pointed at the right image. Are we looking at Jesus? Are we staring full off into him? Are we focused on only a part or one aspect? Or are we able to completely focus in on who Jesus is and who he's asked us to be? Proverbs chapter 27 says it like this: "As a face is reflected in water, so the heart reflects the real person." Translation is that your heart is the mirror of your soul, and that if we're reflecting the right image, those things will come up and out of us. And so we have to be pointed at the right image. We have to be pointed and focused on Christ. Is the mirror of your heart pointed on him? That's the first part of a good reflection, is making sure we're pointed at the right image. The second is this: nothing can come between the mirror and its object. Again, this is Mirrors 101, right? But if something is blocking you in the mirror won't be able to see your reflection. It's like if we used the camera shot that we used before, only there were a chair in the way, then you wouldn't be able to see my face talking to you right now. This is the basic way that mirrors work, right? It has to be able to see the object that it's reflecting. As our hearts reflect Christ, we have to see if there's anything blocking it, anything getting in the way. Sometimes this can look like things that are lodged in our hearts. Sometimes it's habits or poor decisions, but is there anything that's blocking our ability to accurately reflect Christ in our life? Paul speaks to this in 2 Corinthians chapter 13. He says this: "But whenever someone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. For the Lord is the Spirit, and wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. So all of us who have had the veil removed can see and reflect the glory of the Lord. And the Lord, who is Spirit, makes us more and more like Him as we are changed into His glorious image." In other words, Christ has removed any barriers between us and Him. He removed the veil. He removed the thing in between so that there could be a way for us to simply reflect His glory in our lives. And as we reflect His glory, He actually changes us to be a better reflection, to be a better mirror. This is the process by which Christ works. And so it's important for us, first of all, to be pointed and focused at Him, and then secondly, to make sure that there's nothing blocking, nothing getting in the way, and Christ has made sure that that is our ability in Him to do. And the third point is simply this: a distorted image is a lie. Have you ever seen yourself in a funhouse mirror? You know the mirrors I'm talking about, right? They're curved and they're designed to show you something different than an accurate reflection. It's designed to be funny and to make you look different. But can you imagine if you saw your reflection in a funhouse mirror and then went on with the rest of your day as if that was reality, as if that were true, the way you looked to the world around you? That would be silly. The result of a curved mirror doesn't show reality. It doesn't show the truth. Sometimes sin curves our heart. Sometimes it's not reflecting accurately the reality around us, both of the world that we live in and also of the God that we serve. See, our mirror, our hearts can get distorted with things like a poor self-image or a poor image of God as Father, and so it distorts the way that we interact with Him. Our mirrors can be distorted with things like the way that we eat, or the way that we take care of ourselves, or the way that we love the people around us. And our mirror gets a little curved and the image gets to be distorted. It gets to stop reflecting what's real and true and good and starts reflecting a lie. This is part of the work that Paul talks about, that we need to continually be cleansing our mirror, being polished, brushed up, straightened out, that Jesus continues to make our image bearers, to make us a greater reflection of Him. Listen to how he puts it in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. "Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know is now partial and incomplete, but then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely." Paul admits that we are curved mirrors, that our hearts aren't quite where they should be, that right now it's just a puzzling reflection of light, but that's part of the process that God is doing in us, to straighten out our mirrors, to fix the cracks, the blemishes, to polish us up, and to make sure that we're reflecting His image, that we are being good image bearers. And so now, as we turn to discussion, the question for us is, how's your mirror? And if our heart, if our soul, if the way in which we turn and project ourselves to God is how we reflect Him, how's your mirror? Is it dark? Is it pointed at the right thing? Is there a crack in it that needs to be fixed? Maybe it needs a little polishing, a little touching up. That's what we're here for in life groups to do, to continue on our journey with Christ together, to polish each other up, to make sure that we're pointing at the right things, and to make sure that we're all on a path by which we reflect God the most. I hope that you have a great discussion in your group tonight, and I'll see you right back here next week.